The sleek, glass facade of Horizon Bank gleamed in the morning sun, a symbol of trust and wealth in the bustling city. Inside, customers moved about with purpose, their chatter blending with the soft hum of activity. No one paid much attention to the tall, sharply dressed man who stepped through the revolving doors, a calm yet commanding presence in his every move. Elijah Brooks wasn't there for small transactions. In his hand was a check worth $10 million, a sum that could change lives, or shatter egos. He approached the counter with a polite smile, but the moment the check landed on the desk, the air shifted. The bank manager, Martin Thatcher, was called in, a man known for his sharp suits and sharper judgments. With a single glance at Elijah and his check, Martin's expression turned cold. Suspicion flickered in his eyes, followed by a decision that would ripple far beyond this moment. "I'm sorry," Martin said, his voice carrying a thinly veiled condescension. "We can't process this check. It's unusual for someone like you." Elijah's smile didn't waver, but his voice was steady and firm as he replied, "You might want to think carefully about what you're saying, Mr. Thatcher. You have no idea who I am." The sunlight poured through the tall windows of Horizon Bank, casting long shadows across the marble floors. It was just another day for the bustling branch. Tellers shuffled paperwork. Customers stood in line, and the manager's office door remained slightly ajar, a symbol of authority watching over it all. Elijah Brooks stepped into the bank, his polished shoes tapping softly on the pristine floor. His tailored suit fit perfectly, and his quiet confidence turned a few heads. He carried a slim leather briefcase and a folded check in his hand. Elijah wasn't here for a withdrawal or a savings inquiry. He had one purpose: to deposit a check worth $10 million. As he approached the counter, the young teller behind the glass smiled nervously. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I help you today?" "I'd like to deposit this," Elijah said, sliding the check across the counter. The teller's eyes widened as she read the amount. Her mouth opened, then closed, as though words had failed her. I need to call the manager for this," she stammered, clutching the check like it was a bomb about to go off. Enters the manager. Martin Thatcher strode over with his signature air of confidence. In his perfectly pressed navy suit and expensive cologne, Martin was every bit the image of a corporate man. But beneath his polished exterior lay a streak of arrogance that often bled into his decisions. "What seems to be the problem?" Martin asked, his voice clipped. The teller handed him the check without a word. His eyebrows shot up as he scanned the amount, and then his gaze flickered to Elijah. Standing calmly on the other side of the counter, "Sir," Martin said, his tone measured but icy. "Do you have identification?" Elijah reached into his jacket and produced his ID without hesitation. "Of course." Martin took the ID, his eyes narrowing as he examined it. Then he glanced at Elijah again, his lips curling slightly. "This is quite an unusual transaction for someone like you." Elijah tilted his head, his calm demeanor unbroken. "Someone like me?" Martin straightened, clearing his throat. "We have protocols for large transactions, Mr. Brooks. I'll need to verify this check further. Please wait while I make a few calls." Martin disappeared into his office, leaving Elijah standing at the counter. Customers whispered amongst themselves, the air in the bank suddenly charged with curiosity and tension. Inside his office, Martin placed the check on his desk and picked up the phone. "I've got a check here for $10 million, he said, his voice low. "The name is Elijah Brooks. Run it through the system and flag anything unusual." While he waited, Martin leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "No way this is legitimate," he muttered to himself. "Guys like him don't just walk into banks with checks like this." Moments later, his assistant knocked on the door. "Sir, are you sure this is the right approach?" she asked hesitantly. Martin waved her off. "I know what I'm doing. If this is fraud, I'm saving the bank a fortune." Back at the counter, Elijah stood quietly as the tension thickened around him. He noticed the subtle glances from other customers and the whispers exchanged between employees. Martin returned, his face a mask of professional skepticism. "Mr. Brooks," he began, "I'm afraid we can't process this check at this time. There are certain irregularities." Elijah's expression didn't change. He leaned slightly forward, meeting Martin's gaze head-on. "You might want to reconsider, Mr. Thatcher. Check the account it's drawn from. Carefully." Martin stiffened. "Sir, I don't appreciate being threatened." Elijah's smile was faint but unmistakable. "I'm not threatening you. I'm giving you an opportunity to avoid a mistake you'll regret." Martin's jaw tightened. "If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have no choice but to involve security." Elijah straightened, buttoning his jacket. "Do what you need to do. But I'll wait." The entire bank seemed to hold its breath as Elijah returned to a chair in the waiting area. Martin, flushed with frustration, retreated to his office, ready to escalate the matter further. What neither Martin nor anyone else in the bank realized was that Elijah Brooks wasn't an ordinary customer. And the truth of who he was would shake the very foundation of Horizon Bank. Martin Thatcher paced back and forth in his office, gripping the check between his fingers as though it might suddenly reveal its secrets. His assistant, Clara, stood nearby, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Clara," Martin barked, "get me the verification department on the line. I'm not taking chances with this. That amount is unheard of, especially coming from someone like him." Clara hesitated. "Sir, maybe you should. I know what I'm doing," Martin snapped, cutting her off. "Just make the call." She nodded reluctantly and stepped out, leaving Martin alone with his growing irritation. He wasn't sure why this particular customer unnerved him so much. Maybe it was the man's calm confidence or the way he'd warned him to check the account. "It's probably fake," Martin muttered to himself. "These scams are getting more elaborate by the day." Out in the lobby, Elijah remained seated in the waiting area. His demeanor was still unshaken, his hands resting casually on his lap. Other customers stole glances at him, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. A security guard lingered nearby, his posture stiff as though waiting for Martin's orders. But Elijah paid no mind to the uneasy atmosphere. He simply waited, as though he had all the time in the world. Behind the counter, Clara returned to her station. She cast a wary glance toward Elijah before typing a query into the system. A few keystrokes later, her face drained of color. She blinked at the screen, her hand hovering over her mouse as if unsure of what to do next. In his office, Martin finally got through to the verification department. "This is Martin Thatcher, manager of Horizon's downtown branch. I've got a check here for $10 million made out to an Elijah Brooks. I need confirmation on the account it's drawn from." The voice on the other end was calm. "One moment, sir. Let me pull up the details." Martin tapped his fingers impatiently on his desk, muttering under his breath. His thoughts raced, each one more dismissive than the last. There was no way this was real. No way someone like Elijah could walk into his bank with a valid check for that amount. "Mr. Thatcher?" The voice on the phone interrupted his thoughts. "The check is valid, and the account it's drawn from has sufficient funds." Martin froze, the phone pressed tightly against his ear. "Are you sure?" "Yes, sir," the voice replied, its tone firm. "In fact, Mr. Brooks is listed as the primary account holder. He's a very important client of Horizon Bank." The words hit Martin like a freight train. His mouth went dry, and his grip on the phone tightened. "Thank you," he said quickly before hanging up. Martin leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling. How had he missed this? Elijah Brooks wasn't just any customer, he was one of Horizon Bank's most valuable clients. And worse, the check he had refused to process was a direct insult to the man's status. Clara knocked hesitantly on the door before stepping inside. "Sir, I think you should see this," she said, holding out a printed document. Martin snatched it from her hands and scanned the page. It was a profile of Elijah Brooks, detailing his extensive holdings, investments, and, most damning of all, his role as a majority shareholder in Horizon Bank. The color drained from Martin's face. He looked up at Clara, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't anyone tell me who he was?" Clara shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, it's all in the system. You just didn't check." Martin rose from his chair, smoothing his suit as he prepared to face the man he had insulted. He opened the door to his office and stepped into the lobby, his confident facade cracking under the weight of his mistake. Elijah looked up as Martin approached, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Brooks," Martin began, his voice strained. "I owe you an apology. There's been a misunderstanding." "Stop," Elijah said calmly, raising a hand. His voice carried an authority that silenced the entire room. "The only misunderstanding here is your assumption that you can judge someone by appearances. I warned you to check the account, didn't I?" Martin swallowed hard, nodding. "You did, sir. And I failed to do so. I'm deeply sorry." Elijah stood, his towering presence suddenly making Martin feel very small. "Save your apologies, Mr. Thatcher. Actions speak louder than words. Let's see how you handle this moving forward." As Elijah strode toward the exit, the room seemed to hold its breath. Martin remained rooted to the spot, his mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. The bank employees exchanged nervous glances, wondering what would happen next. One thing was clear: this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a reckoning that would change the face of Horizon Bank forever. The silence that followed Elijah's departure from the bank was deafening. Martin Thatcher stood frozen, his polished image now a crumbling facade of arrogance and shame. Around him, whispers filled the air, employees and customers murmuring in hushed tones. Clara approached cautiously, her face pale. "Sir, what should we do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Martin's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned and walked briskly back into his office, shutting the door behind him. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. Back at his desk, Martin scrolled through Elijah Brooks's account details on his computer. What he found sent a chill down his spine. Elijah wasn't just wealthy, he was a titan of industry. His portfolio boasted holdings in real estate, technology, and finance, including a controlling share in Horizon Bank itself. His net worth was astronomical, far beyond anything Martin could have imagined, but the most damning detail of all was Elijah's position as the bank's largest shareholder. Not only did he own a significant portion of the institution, but his influence also extended to the highest levels of leadership. Martin leaned back in his chair, his hands trembling. "How did I miss this?" he muttered. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Clara again, holding another document. "Sir," she said hesitantly, "I thought you might want to see this." She handed him a printed profile detailing Elijah's professional background. As Martin scanned the page, his stomach churned. Elijah's rise from humble beginnings to becoming a self-made billionaire was nothing short of extraordinary. The profile revealed that Elijah had grown up in a modest neighborhood, the son of hard-working parents who had instilled in him the values of perseverance and integrity. Despite facing systemic challenges and discrimination, he excelled academically and earned a scholarship to a prestigious university. After graduation, Elijah entered the corporate world, quickly rising through the ranks due to his sharp mind and innovative thinking. But his path wasn't without obstacles. Time and again, he encountered people like Martin, individuals who underestimated him based on his appearance. Rather than letting their prejudice defeat him, Elijah used it as fuel to drive his success. Over the years, he built a vast empire, acquiring assets and companies, including Horizon Bank, where he remained a silent force behind the scenes. As Martin finished reading, he felt a sinking sensation in his chest. This wasn't just about a check. His actions had insulted one of the most influential figures in the bank's history. Clara cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "Sir, what are you going to do?" Martin didn't answer immediately. He stared out the window, his mind racing. "I need to fix this," he said finally. "I need to make things right." But even as he spoke, he knew that repairing the damage wouldn't be easy. Elijah Brooks wasn't the kind of man who tolerated disrespect, and Martin's actions had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. Meanwhile, Elijah's name was already spreading through the bank. Employees whispered about his visit, piecing together the details of what had happened. The realization that their majority shareholder had been treated so poorly sent shockwaves through the branch. In the break room, a group of tellers discussed the incident. "Did you hear? That man was Elijah Brooks, the Elijah Brooks." One of them exclaimed, "Wait, the guy who owns half the city?" Another asked, her eyes wide. "Not just the city," a third chimed in. "He's the majority shareholder in this bank." Martin's in deep trouble. The gravity of the situation was clear to everyone except, perhaps, Martin himself. At the same time, Elijah sat in his sleek black car, parked just down the street from the bank. His driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Everything all right, sir?" Elijah nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Everything's fine. Let them stew for a while." He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "Yes, this is Elijah Brooks. I'll need a meeting with the board of directors today, if possible." The person on the other end of the line responded affirmatively, and Elijah ended the call. He leaned back in his seat, his mind already working through the next steps. Back at the bank, Martin prepared to face the inevitable. He drafted an email to the regional director, hoping to get ahead of the fallout. But every word felt hollow. No matter what he said, there was no undoing the damage. As the hours ticked by, the weight of his mistake grew heavier. Martin didn't know it yet, but Elijah's next move would change the trajectory of Horizon Bank, and his career, forever. The boardroom of Horizon Bank's headquarters was a space designed to intimidate. Its long oak table, lined with high-backed chairs, exuded authority. The walls bore portraits of past executives, each a testament to the bank's legacy. Today, however, the usual air of formality was replaced with tension. The board members sat in uneasy silence, glancing at the empty chair at the head of the table. They had all been summoned unexpectedly. And the reason for this emergency meeting was still unclear. The doors opened, and Elijah Brooks entered. His tailored suit and calm stride commanded attention. As he approached the table, the room fell silent. Without a word, he took his place at the head, his eyes scanning the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "thank you for coming on such short notice. I assure you, what we discuss today will be of utmost importance to the future of Horizon Bank." In a small, windowless office just a few floors below, Martin Thatcher sat nervously, his fingers drumming against the edge of his desk. He had been instructed to remain there until further notice. The email from the regional director had been curt: "Do not leave the building." Await instructions. Martin's thoughts were a whirlwind. He knew the meeting upstairs had everything to do with Elijah Brooks and the incident earlier that day. But what he didn't know was how far the fallout would reach, or whether his career could survive it. A knock at the door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Clara stepped in, her expression unreadable. "They're asking for you in the boardroom," she said. Martin's heart sank. He rose slowly, adjusting his tie. "What do you think they're going to do?" Clara hesitated before replying. "I think you should be prepared for the worst." Back in the boardroom, Elijah had begun laying out the morning's events. He recounted the interaction with Martin. Sparing no detail, "I presented a valid check, drawn from my own account," Elijah said, his voice calm but firm. "Not only was it questioned, but I was subjected to veiled insults and outright refusal. This is not a matter of policy, it's a matter of judgment." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Some had already heard whispers about the incident, but hearing it from Elijah himself made the gravity of the situation impossible to ignore. One board member, a woman named Margaret, cleared her throat. "Mr. Brooks, are you suggesting this was discrimination?" Elijah met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. The actions taken against me were rooted in bias, whether conscious or not. And bias, in any form, has no place in this institution." When Martin entered the boardroom, all eyes turned to him. The weight of their scrutiny made his steps falter, but he forced himself to walk to the center of the room. "Elijah," he began, his voice strained, "Mr. Brooks, I want to offer my sincerest apologies. I realize now that my actions were inappropriate." "Stop," Elijah interrupted, raising a hand. "This isn't about apologies, Mr. Thatcher. This is about accountability." Martin froze, his mouth hanging open. Elijah gestured toward an empty chair. "Sit." As Martin obeyed, Elijah turned back to the board. "This incident isn't an isolated case. It's a symptom of a larger problem within this institution. A culture that allows judgment to cloud professionalism and arrogance to overshadow accountability. He placed a folder on the table and slid it toward Margaret. Inside, you'll find documentation of similar complaints, clients who were mistreated, employees who were ignored. This isn't just about me. It's about the standards we claim to uphold but fail to enforce. The board erupted into murmurs as they passed the folder around. Some members seemed genuinely concerned, while others appeared defensive, their loyalty to Martin evident in their furrowed brows and crossed arms. "This is a serious accusation," said one board member. A man named Alan. "But is it fair to place the blame entirely on Mr. Thatcher? He's one manager out of many." Elijah leaned forward, his gaze sharp. True leadership sets the tone for the organization. If managers like Martin are allowed to operate unchecked, it reflects on all of us. Accountability starts at the top. After hours of discussion, the board agreed to adjourn the meeting. A formal investigation would be launched, and Martin's position would be evaluated based on its findings. As the meeting ended, Elijah stood and addressed the room one final time. This isn't about retribution. It's about setting a standard. Horizon Bank must be a place where everyone, client or employee, is treated with respect and dignity. Anything less is unacceptable. He left the boardroom without another word, his presence leaving an indelible mark on everyone there. Martin returned to his office, his shoulders heavy with the weight of uncertainty. He knew his fate now rested in the hands of the board, and in the goodwill of the man he had wronged. For the first time in his career, Martin felt powerless. And he realized that the man he had dismissed so easily that morning held all the power he thought he had. Elijah Brooks's action sent ripples through Horizon Bank, from the boardroom to the break rooms. The once untouchable aura of Martin Thatcher had cracked, and everyone was watching to see how the situation would unfold. But for Elijah, this wasn't just about addressing Martin's behavior, it was about reforming the very foundation of the institution. As the investigation began, tensions within the boardroom grew. Elijah's call for accountability stirred conflicting loyalties. Some members viewed his stance as necessary, a long overdue correction to the culture of complacency. Others, however, perceived it as an overreach. Margaret, one of Elijah's staunchest supporters on the board, voiced her thoughts during a private conversation with him. "You've done the right thing by bringing this to light," she said, her tone resolute. "But you've also made enemies. Some of the others feel threatened by the changes you're advocating." Elijah gave her a small smile. "Change always feels like a threat to those who benefit from the status quo," he replied. "But this isn't about them. It's about the future of this bank and the people we serve." In his corner office, Martin Thatcher was running out of options. His attempts to rally support from the board had been met with mixed results. Some members, like Alan, were willing to back him, citing his years of service and experience. Others, however, remained silent, a clear indication that their loyalties were shifting. Clara, his assistant, approached him cautiously. "Mr. Thatcher, there's been talk among the staff. People are saying this might go beyond the investigation, that Mr. Brooks might push for structural changes." Martin scoffed, though his expression betrayed his unease. "He might be a shareholder, but he's not a dictator. He can't just rewrite the rules." Clara hesitated. "With respect, sir, he doesn't need to rewrite them. He just needs to enforce the ones we've ignored." While the board debated and Martin schemed, Elijah focused on building support where it mattered most, among the employees. He visited branches, speaking directly with staff members and listening to their concerns. At one branch, a young teller named Sarah approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Brooks, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Elijah said, his tone inviting. "Why do you care so much about what happens here? You're already so successful, you don't need this bank." Elijah smiled, his expression warm. "Because success means nothing if it doesn't lift others with it. This bank has the potential to be a force for good, not just profit. But that starts with treating people, the staff and the customers, with respect." His words resonated deeply with the employees, who had long felt overlooked by upper management. Slowly but surely, Elijah was winning hearts and minds. As the investigation progressed, new details emerged about Martin's leadership. Former employees came forward, sharing stories of being dismissed or overlooked. Clients recounted similar experiences, painting a damning picture of a man more concerned with preserving his power than serving the bank's mission. The board, now armed with evidence, reconvened to discuss their findings. Elijah presented his case with characteristic calm, outlining not only Martin's failures but also his vision for the bank's future. "This isn't about punishing one man," he said, addressing the room. "It's about setting a precedent. Horizon Bank must stand for fairness and integrity. Or it stands for nothing at all." Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Martin wasn't ready to go down without a fight. He launched a desperate appeal, accusing Elijah of overstepping his role as a shareholder. "This bank was built on tradition," Martin argued, his voice rising. "We've weathered decades of change without losing our identity. What Mr. Brooks is proposing would tear apart everything we've worked for." Elijah didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Tradition should be a foundation, not a cage. If Horizon Bank can't evolve, it will collapse. And if you think I'm tearing it apart, you've misunderstood. I'm saving it, from people like you." The meeting ended without a definitive resolution. But the lines had been drawn. Martin's support within the boardroom was dwindling, while Elijah's influence continued to grow. Outside the boardroom, the employees whispered about what might come next. For them, Elijah's presence represented hope, a chance for the bank to finally become a place where their voices mattered. For Martin, it was the beginning of the end. The corridors of Horizon Bank's headquarters buzzed with tension. The investigation into Martin Thatcher's conduct was nearing its conclusion, and the board was preparing for a pivotal meeting that would determine his fate. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, alliances were being forged and broken. Martin Thatcher wasn't a man to surrender easily. Faced with mounting evidence and dwindling support, he resorted to the only strategy he had left: making deals. In the dimly lit corner of a private restaurant, Martin met with Alan, one of the board members who had shown reluctance to side with Elijah. Over glasses of expensive whiskey, Martin laid out his proposal. "Alan," he began, leaning in, "we both know this isn't about me. It's about keeping this bank from falling into the hands of someone who doesn't understand our history." Alan raised an eyebrow. "You mean someone like Elijah Brooks? The man who owns the largest stake in the bank?" Martin forced a smile. "Ownership doesn't equate to leadership. You've seen how he's stirring things up. If he gets his way, it won't stop with me. He'll overhaul the entire board. Do you really want to risk your seat?" Alan hesitated, his loyalty wavering. Sensing his opening, Martin pressed on. "Help me block this vote. We can present a united front, show the board that we still have control. In return, I'll make sure your position remains secure." Alan didn't reply immediately, but his silence spoke volumes. While Martin worked the shadows, Elijah took a different approach. Rather than rely solely on boardroom politics, he turned to the bank's employees, the people most affected by the institution's culture. In a series of town hall meetings, Elijah invited staff members to share their experiences. His calm demeanor and genuine interest in their concerns quickly won over even the most skeptical employees. At one such meeting, a mid-level manager named Priya stood up. "Mr. Brooks," she said hesitantly, "what happens if you succeed? What guarantees do we have that things will really change?" Elijah nodded thoughtfully. "That's a fair question, Priya. And the answer is simple: transparency. Change begins with open communication and accountability at every level. But I can't do it alone. I need people like you, dedicated professionals who care about this bank, to help rebuild it." His words resonated deeply, sparking a ripple of applause. As Elijah continued his outreach, stories of his humility and vision spread throughout the bank. Employees began to rally behind him, sharing their support on internal forums and through word of mouth. "Have you heard Elijah speak?" one teller asked another during a break. "He actually listens. It's like he gets what we're going through." "I know," the other replied. "It feels like, for the first time, someone actually cares about us, not just the bottom line." Back in the boardroom, the tension was palpable. The vote of no confidence in Martin Thatcher's leadership was just days away, and both sides were preparing for a final showdown. Elijah sat in his office, reviewing his strategy with Margaret and a few other allies on the board. Martin's trying to secure votes behind closed doors. Margaret warned. We need to counter his narrative before the meeting. Elijah nodded. We focus on the facts. The employees' voices, the complaints we've uncovered, those speak louder than any backroom deal. The board can't ignore them. As the vote approached, Martin made one final move to sway the outcome. He called an emergency meeting with a small group of board members, attempting to rally them with promises of stability and continuity. This bank doesn't need disruption, he argued passionately. It needs leadership that understands its roots. Don't let one man's ego jeopardize everything we've built. But even as he spoke, he could sense the cracks in his support. His once loyal allies exchanged uncertain glances. Their confidence in him waning. By the end of the week, both sides had drawn their battle lines. The employees had made their voices heard, the board was divided, and the entire institution braced for the vote that would decide the future of Horizon Bank. For Elijah, it was about more than ousting Martin, it was about proving that change was possible. For Martin, it was a fight for survival, a desperate attempt to cling to power. The boardroom was packed to capacity, its usual solemn air replaced by an electric tension. The vote to determine Martin Thatcher's fate had drawn every board member. Including those who rarely attended meetings in person. Elijah Brooks sat at the far end of the table, his calm demeanor masking the weight of the moment. Martin Thatcher, seated opposite him, was visibly tense, his usual confidence replaced by an edge of desperation. Margaret rose first to address the room. This vote isn't just about one man, she said, her voice steady. It's about the values we want this bank to uphold. Mr. Thatcher's tenure has been marked by favoritism and bias, which have no place in an institution like Horizon Bank. Martin cut in, his voice sharp. And what about stability? My leadership has guided this bank through years of consistent profits. Are we willing to throw that away for the sake of appeasing one man's grievances? Elijah stood, drawing the attention of the room. This isn't about me, he said calmly. It's about accountability. Profits mean nothing if they come at the cost of integrity. Horizon Bank deserves better. The debate continued for over an hour, each side presenting its case. When the time came to vote, the tension was unbearable. Board members cast their votes one by one, their decisions revealed in real time on a screen at the head of the table. The tally was neck and neck, with each vote bringing the room closer to a breaking point. Then came Alan's turn. Everyone held their breath. Martin had counted on Alan's support, but as Alan hesitated, it became clear something had shifted. I vote no confidence, Alan said, his voice barely above a whisper. A gasp rippled through the room. Martin's face paled as the final vote sealed his fate. The motion to remove him had passed. Martin stood, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. You'll regret this, he spat, glaring at the room. Mark my words. Elijah remained seated, his expression calm. Regret doesn't build the future. Accountability does. As Martin stormed out, the boardroom erupted into murmurs. Elijah's vision for the bank was now within reach, but the real work was just beginning. The shockwaves from the vote reverberated across Horizon Bank, but the drama was far from over. Martin Thatcher, though officially ousted, refused to leave quietly. His years at the helm had taught him how to navigate chaos and weaponize it. Just days after the board's decision, Horizon Bank received a formal notice. Martin was suing the institution for wrongful termination and defamation. The claim sent shivers through the boardroom. He's trying to stall the transition, Margaret said during a meeting with Elijah. He knows the lawsuit will create instability and buy him time to rally support. Elijah nodded thoughtfully. He's betting on fear. But we can't let his tactics derail us. The truth is on our side. Behind the scenes, Martin leveraged his remaining connections to spread rumors. Stories of internal discord and financial uncertainty began appearing in the media. Painting Elijah as an inexperienced disruptor, Elijah knew that silence would only fuel speculation. He called a press conference to address the rumors head-on. Standing before a crowd of reporters, he delivered a clear and composed statement. Horizon Bank is committed to transparency and integrity, he said. The recent changes in leadership are part of our effort to uphold those values. While we respect Mr. Thatcher's right to take legal action, we remain confident in the board's decision and the direction we are heading. His calm demeanor and measured words won public support, turning the tide against Martin's smear campaign. Employees, who had feared uncertainty, began to rally behind Elijah's leadership. As his influence waned, Martin grew increasingly erratic. He made a series of public appearances, accusing Elijah and the board of orchestrating a vendetta against him. But his efforts backfired, as former employees and clients came forward to corroborate the allegations of favoritism and unethical practices. One night, as Elijah reviewed the bank strategy with Margaret, he received a call. It was from Clara, Martin's former assistant. "There's something you should know," Clara said, her voice tense. "Martin's planning to leak confidential bank data to damage your reputation. He's desperate, and he'll do anything to regain control." Elijah's expression darkened. "Thank you for telling me, Clara. This ends now." Elijah acted swiftly, alerting the legal and security teams to safeguard the bank's data. At the same time, he worked with the board to ensure that any attempts by Martin to undermine the institution would be met with immediate legal repercussions. "Martin underestimated us," Elijah told the board. "He thinks this is a battle of power, but it's about principles. And principles always win in the end." Within days, Martin's plans unraveled. The media, once sympathetic to his plight, turned against him as evidence of his unethical conduct came to light. His lawsuit lost credibility, and his remaining supporters distanced themselves to preserve their reputations. Realizing he had no path forward, Martin withdrew his lawsuit and disappeared from the public eye. As Horizon Bank began to recover, Elijah reflected on the battle they had fought. Martin's final move had been bold, but it had only served to strengthen Elijah's resolve, and the institution's commitment to integrity. The morning Elijah Brooks officially became the CEO of Horizon Bank was uncharacteristically quiet. The drama of the past weeks had settled, leaving the institution in a cautious but hopeful state. For the employees and board members who had supported him, this marked the dawn of a new era. Elijah's first act as CEO was symbolic but meaningful. He entered the bank's grand lobby early, greeting employees with a smile and a firm handshake. To many, it felt like a breath of fresh air. "Good morning," he said to Priya, the mid-level manager who had questioned his plans weeks earlier. "I hope you're ready to help lead the charge for change." Priya smiled. "More than ready, sir." Elijah nodded. "Then let's get to work together." In his first week, Elijah implemented measures to rebuild trust within the bank. A new employee feedback system was introduced, allowing staff at all levels to voice concerns anonymously. Additionally, he announced the formation of a diversity and inclusion committee to address systemic biases, a direct acknowledgement of the issues that had come to light under Martin's tenure. "It's time we listen to everyone," Elijah told his leadership team. "True progress comes from collective effort." Employees responded enthusiastically, sharing ideas and suggestions. For the first time in years, they felt heard. While the employees rallied behind Elijah, some board members remained skeptical. During a tense meeting, Alan, who had switched his vote in the 11th hour, raised a concern. "Your ideas sound good in theory, Elijah," Alan said. "But how do we ensure profitability while implementing all these changes?" Elijah leaned forward. "Profitability comes from sustainability, Alan. Happy employees lead to better customer service, which drives loyalty and growth. It's not a trade-off, it's an investment." The board was silent for a moment, then Margaret spoke up. "I've seen enough of Elijah's leadership to believe in his vision. I suggest we give him the support he needs to succeed." The tension eased, and one by one, the board members nodded in agreement. As the weeks turned into months, Elijah's reforms began to show results. Employee satisfaction rose, customer complaints decreased, and the bank's reputation slowly began to recover. One evening, as Elijah stood in the quiet boardroom overlooking the city, Margaret joined him. "You've done something incredible, Elijah," she said. "This bank needed a leader like you." Elijah smiled. It's not about me. It's about everyone who believed we could be better. Margaret nodded. Still, you made them believe. And that's what matters. Elijah Brooks stood before the gathered employees in the grand lobby of Horizon Bank. The atmosphere was electric with hope. This wasn't just another corporate address, it was a moment of transformation. Today marks the beginning of a new era, Elijah began, his voice steady. An era where every voice matters, where integrity guides us, and where we rise together. Under Elijah's leadership, the bank underwent profound changes. New policies ensured fair treatment for all employees, and programs were launched to empower underserved communities. The bank's reputation rebounded as customers returned, drawn by its renewed commitment to transparency. Meanwhile, Martin Thatcher's name faded into obscurity, his once unshakable legacy overshadowed by his scandals. As Elijah sat in his office one evening, Priya knocked and entered. "We've just hit our highest customer satisfaction rating in a decade," she said, smiling. Elijah nodded. "This is only the beginning," he replied, looking out at the city skyline, envisioning a brighter future. If you enjoyed this thrilling journey of redemption and leadership, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more captivating stories. Share your thoughts on Elijah's journey in the comments below. What do you think of his leadership? Let us know. Stay tuned for more. And thank you for watching.